Today I'm going to talk about one of the most important insights of my life, and in this I'm connecting the loss aversion theory of economics with how it helps you to get rid of ego. The loss aversion theory is that 1 lakh rupees gain gives you some happiness, and similarly 1 lakh rupees loss gives you some unhappiness or sadness or suffering. But the intensity of loss of 1 lakh is much more. The pain intensity is much more than the intensity of joy that you experience for the same amount of money. So that is why people try to avoid losses, because they are much more painful. Now I extend this to the understanding of ego. Ego is the source of all kinds of pleasures, joys for you. For example, I'm highly educated, I'm very rich, I'm very smart, I am good in this, I have got this, etc., etc. So most of the joys people have is of the egos. Similarly, majority of the suffering comes from ego. I feel inadequate, small, I'm not good in this, he's better than me, she's better than me, they have insulted me, I have been ignored, excluded, etc., etc. It's full of ego only. So you can imagine, now you look at this entire picture very clearly and see that the joy that you get from ego and the sorrows that you get from ego, the intensity of sorrow is much more than the joys that you get from ego. So the moment you are able to see this with clarity, if you have this capacity to see this with clarity, or even in relationship, if you're able to see the joys and sorrows of relationship with clarity, then you'll know whether you should have ego or you should have relationship or not, because nobody wants suffering, nobody wants sorrow. So the intensity is much more. And in my understanding, in my ability, when I look at ego in my life, in my personal life, I find it has much more painful to have ego, big ego, than to have a small ego. It's not possible to fully get rid of ego at all, because you can't survive with that. So this insight helps in dropping the intensity of ego itself. So the ego, or the size of ego, if you want to call it, will become very small, very minimal, which helps you to live a life comfortably but not make your life miserable. This is why enlightened people are very humble people. All the great people who really understand life are really, really very humble. And this is the way to salvation, freedom from suffering. Now you'll see people who have big egos, they will have big fights. They'll get into big rivalries and get into all kinds of problems. So once you are able to see this, that ego gives you joy and suffering, but the suffering is much more, your ego will drop by itself. You don't have to drop it. So this capacity to see clearly that ego is the source of my suffering, and I'm able to see this, the dynamics, this, nobody wants suffering. So this instinct of not wanting suffering will drop the ego. I would like you to reflect on this and see if you can internalize it and see this with clarity. Now, the one skill that required to have this understanding is capacity to see clearly the role that ego is having in my life. Now, this capacity can be built. How to build this capacity to see things clearly, perceive things in much more objective and wider vision? This capacity increases with meditation. So I would also recommend that this is why meditation is very helpful, the mindfulness. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.